We are moving on to our next session, how to set up a hyperautomation CoE. And we are here to welcome Narendran Thillaisthanam. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. He can correct me when he comes on. He's a great friend to us as well. He is the CTO of WNS-Vuram, and Vikram Goyal, Senior Director of ServiceNow CoE, also with WNS-Vuram. Gentlemen, I hope you can join us now. You can click on the webinar button. That is the door that says webinar, and go to webinar or enter webinar now. In the meantime, audience, I'd like to remind you to just stick with us till the end, because we are going to have an opportunity for all of you to turn on your cameras and video and talk to us. And now I will turn this over to both of you, since we are. You can both unmute yourselves and you can start your presentation now.
All right. So Francisca, I hope I'm audible here.
You are all good.
All good. Okay, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my presentation here just in a quick minute. And I hope you can see the presentation. Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Good morning. Good evening, everyone. First of all, it's a big pleasure connecting with all of you. And thank you, Francisca, for this wonderful opportunity. Look forward to connecting with everyone in the audience here. The topic today we are going to talk about is how to set up a Hyperautomation Center of Excellence. And this is one of the series in the Hyperautomation webinars that we are going to present. So, basically, we are going to touch upon what is hyperautomation, just a very basic level setting of what the topic means. And then we're going to articulate very simple constructs around why do we need a hyperautomation CoE. And then if you're convinced about why, then we'll look at what are the models for execution, which is where we're going to cover the what HACoE. And we'll look at tools, which is where we'll go into the how part of it, how HACoE. We'll look at a couple of quick case studies, and then we have a very short demo of a hyperautomation CoE toolkit, which I thought will, where we can underscore the importance of tools and methodologies there. So with that, that's the agenda for today. And before we get deeper, Francisca, it would be great if you can actually run the first poll question, if I may request you to do that.
Poll is coming. Poll is coming. 1 second.
Sure. Thank you. All right, so the question is, which hyperautomation platform do you currently use? We just want to get a basic survey here, whether it is Appian, Power Platform, ServiceNow, UiPath. Of course, there could be others that you are using. Feel free to, mark others as appropriate. Just wanted to get a context here. It'll be good to know how the spread is. Okay, I hope you would have gotten those questions out of the way. With that, we'll get going here. We have the response. It looks like Power Platform is the leading tool that most of you are using. ServiceNow is a pretty strong contender here. We do see some Appian participants, and I'd be really curious to know what are the other technologies you're using. It could be Pega, it could be something else, but really happy to know. Thank you for this. Once again, I appreciate all the feedback there. Okay, with that, we'll get started. Very quick introduction about ourselves. We are WNS-Vuram. Vuram as an entity was founded in 2011. We are a hyperautomation specialist. That's the only thing we do. We actually work in hyperautomation and low-code projects. And we have executed more than 1,000 plus low-code and HA projects over the course of last 13 years. A couple of years back, we got acquired by our parent entity, which is WNS, which is listed in the New York Stock Exchange, about $1.3 billion of revenue. So we are part of a large family right now. And we count Appian, Microsoft, and UiPath and others as our key partners. And just to call out that we have been recognized by some of the vendor analyst and vendor community there. All right. Okay. So I'll start with the preamble. What is hyperautomation and why is it even important? And then we'll go into the CoE aspects of it. Fundamentally, hyperautomation is, if you ask me, uh, most of us deal with process automation as an industry, right? And hyperautomation is not a technology, it is a discipline. Just like agile is a discipline, hyperautomation is a discipline whereby you bring a business-driven approach to automation, meaning if you have an end-to-end process, what you're really saying here is which of these steps in the process can I automate? And how do I rapidly identify a particular process, particular step? And how do I vet whether this is the right ROI for me? And what tool do I bring in order to automate that particular step? And then you do this iteratively, just like Agile, you do it iteratively, repeatedly. And that essentially is hyper automation. Now, what is different about hyper automation over other automation technologies is one, you look at this as an end-to-end process encompassing multiple departments, multiple even suppliers and vendors, so that it covers the entire spectrum of the enterprise, number one. And number two, in hyper automation, you actually bring multiple technologies together. So you shouldn't be afraid of bringing a BPM or an RPA or an AI or other technologies as you deem fit. This was introduced in 2020 by Gartner, and very soon it became the number one ranking technology trend in the same year. And hyperautomation does give business benefit. 30% reduction in operating cost is what Gartner actually projects. And the market is quite strong, 32 billion roughly by 2029, with a strong CAGR of at about 20%. So, bottom line, hyperautomation is widely adopted and it's actually pretty much in use. Some of the technologies within the hyperautomation umbrella that you will come across, we already talked about BPM technologies. It could be process discovery, it could be process automation. With Gen AI being the new kid in the block, there's quite a few technologies that actually encompasses hyperautomation. So, you know, the whole idea is that you should be good at embracing all of them into a mix. I'll talk about why do you need a hyperautomation CoE before we go deeper into what is it and how do we go about building it. So there are three drivers we believe why you would need a hyperautomation CoE. Number one, there is a lot of digital fragmentation that is happening here. And what I mean by that is hyperautomation by definition brings multiple technologies. We saw that, in the previous slide also. So effectively, there is a lot of questions the customers are asking about. If I have a project, if I have a implementation, which technology do I bring in? Should I automate using an Appian or a BPM technology, or should I bring in a RPA technology, or should I use a Gen AI? And this fragmentation is going to remain. In fact, it is going to exacerbate. It is going to become bigger. It's not going to get smaller. And so, the CoE will become an important arbitrator as to how to go about executing projects and determining which technology would be the best suit. We call this as a friend door opportunity or friend door mechanism. So that's one reason why you would need a hyperautomation CoE. I'll talk a little bit more about it as well. The second reason, there's a very strong citizens developer wave, and I'll once again articulate. I have a couple of slides on what it is and why do you need to take a look at it and what is the role of CoE here. The third reason, which is actually the traditional reason why you need CoE, is because you need to bring all the best practices and governance, standardization, and all the good stuff there. So if you take a step back, when you're talking about technology and proliferation, we in the process automation industry, when you look at the evolution over the last 20 and the next 10 years, if you project it out, there's something fundamental that is happening. Almost every 10 years, there's something happening there. Back in 2005, BPM came up onto the stage, and this was all about workflow and automating human processes, making sure humans are able to work efficiently, and so on and so forth. So think of this as heavy-duty process orchestration and process automation, and BPM software actually solved that particular puzzle. Roughly about 10 years back, RPA came into the scene, and what we call as lightweight automation. It's in a way they complemented the BPM wave, and this is where the task automation came into picture, and you had the digital persona or the bots coming into picture, and about just about now, you're seeing a lot of AI getting embedded into your process orchestration, and in the future, you're going to see a lot of autonomous agents starting about maybe 20 in the next few years up to 2035. We're going to see a lot of agents of proliferating it. The message I want to send with all this is that you might be thinking, I'm in a process automation industry. I may be doing low code. I'm automating some part of the process. And what is inevitable is you will have to deal with multiple of these technologies. And especially if you're embarking on hyperautomation, it is a given that you will come across multiple of these technologies. So, like I said, one of the strong reasons and one of the reasons why we are seeing a lot of companies actually setting up a hyperautomation CoE is to have experts who can actually arbitrate, you have bring those experiences across multiple platforms into one umbrella, into a cohesive way, and set up processes and policies and procedures that can actually avoid or help you, in terms of what technologies to embark on and avoid digital fragmentation. I touched upon citizens development. IDC says there is going to be about 1 billion applications that will be built between now and 2028. In other words, we are really talking about the next 3 years. We are talking about 1 billion new applications, okay, which is incredibly large number of applications that are going to be built. And guess what? Gartner statistics says roughly about 50% of all new developments will be done by citizens developers. So if you are an enterprise and if you're catering to your traditional IT development methodology, you may want to sit back and think through and see how can I leverage this new movement, which is about enabling business people and creating business developers and empowering them. So we call this as a great left shift where, where you had your traditional IT developers for enterprise apps, slowly we are beginning to see that there is going to be a mix of IT and business developers. There are applications which will be built purely by business developers or the so-called citizens developers. In fact, even enterprise consumers are going to be a lot more tech savvy with self-serve coming into picture, with Gen AI, which really makes it easy for consumers to consume applications. So there's a lot of shift happening from traditional IT development into your all the way through the left. So once again, it is super important for you to set up a hyperautomation CoE, which will then arbitrate and tell you and give you the best practices and principles in terms of which application should be built by IT versus which ones should be built by business developers. How do you coach? How do you mentor them? What kind of processes and policies do you set up, et cetera, et cetera. The third reason, which is one of the strong traditional reasons why you need a CoE, is obviously governance and best practices. It is super important to have a business alignment, business and IT alignment, and CoE plays a very strong role in terms of making sure there is an ROI. You just don't automate a process for the sake of automation, and there is coherent development. Especially when you have a technology sprawl, and when you are building a lot of projects and we are scaling your organization, it is super important to have a consistent development methodology and standards and practices. And we'll show some of these elements in the form of a CoE toolkit. But the idea again is that you need a strong governance practice. Not to mention other aspects such as innovation, driving innovation and scalability, building reusable assets, and all the good stuff there. Now, once you're convinced that you need a hyperautomation CoE, let's look at some of the models by which some of the popular models we have seen customers adopt from a CoE standpoint. The most common CoE model is what we call as a centralized model. Think of this as a CoE. So there is business team, there are multiple business teams, and there is an IT team, and then there is CoE, which comprises of both business and IT. Fundamentally, this acts as a framework. There are people from both multiple organizations, but everything is standardized here. You'll have standardized governance methodology. You'll have standardized templates. In terms of approval process, you'll have a standardized mechanism, et cetera, et cetera. What it really gives is your ability to standardize your process of development across the enterprise. But of course, it does come with a downside, which is that if your organization needs to move fast, this kind of a model, this kind of a structure can be limiting at times, especially because every request has to go to the CoE and then it has to come down and percolate backwards. So it's a good model. This is one of the standard ones which we have seen in the industry quite a lot. There are also companies which have gone the other way around and done the other extreme, which is what we call as a federated model. In the federated model, what we have noticed is the CoE is embedded into the business teams. In a way, this could be a business team or it could be geographically spread. However, you actually define the structure, but you are embedding the different CoEs within these departments. The biggest advantage of doing that is you will have local procedures, local standards, local initiatives, which will allow your company to move fast, your enterprise to move fast. So you'll gain the velocity advantage. But obviously, one of the downsides is that, especially when you want to gain an enterprise-wide standards, and if there is a lot of conformance, it becomes very difficult for you to execute and make it standardized. Now, there's a new model which we are seeing lately coming up, especially after built on the principles of Spotify Agile methodology, which is what we call as a community of excellence. And this is where think of it as a combination of both centralized and federated model, where you have a very small team of centralized COE people, all the specialists and some of the roles are actually part of the centralized team. But then outside of the COE, you have a community of practice or a community of excellence where there are people from different business units and IT who actually act as a maven. These are the people who are going to take the innovation, the standards, the principles, the practices that are actually governed by the IT team, and they will localize it. They will help localize it in different departments and different business units. So it's in a way it sort of blends both the centralized and the federated model. And especially if you already have a COE and if you are looking at scaling your COE, the community of practice can be a very interesting model, to look at, and that is something that we are seeing, picking up in the form of adoption. So, those are the three common frameworks or three common models, we have looked at. Now we'll look at the implementation aspects of it in terms of what does a COE really bring to bear, and effectively fundamentally, a COE is going to look at three different aspects of it. It's a people, process, and technology, right? So when you are actually embarking on a COE, there are various aspects of it that you will have to come across. For example, when you look at the people side of it, you need to house the COE with deep technical experts, whether they are platform architects, solution designers, R&D specialists, or automation specialists. Nowadays with a lot of automations and RPA and AI coming in, so you need to have certain kind of expertise to begin with in terms of people that you bring in that you house within your center of excellence. And the other important aspect, a lot of times we have seen companies miss the buzz, is that you also want to think about how does the COE reach to your entire organization. Let's especially if you're a medium to large sized organization, the influence of the COE should be much broader beyond just a project or a program. It has to be an enterprise wide scale, which is why the coaching and the influencing part of it is super important. In fact, you should look at COE as being a fulcrum for facilitating development, not just in one area but across the enterprise. So you need to look at what are the new models that are emerging for citizens developers, what kind of coaching, certification, enablement do we have, what kind of webinars are they going to conduct, what kind of training programs, how do they mentor for any program, how do we embed COE specialists into different departments. So all of this is becoming important here, not to mention about leadership. In fact, one of the things we have noticed is a lot of times companies, we have seen enterprises bypass COE leadership, and only to realize that after a few years it affects the scale or the operations that they have come up with. So you need a strong leader, and yet the leader should be flexible enough to accommodate the business as well as the IT push and pull in order to execute a very successful program here. Now, from a process standpoint, I talked about basically an intake process, which is super important. We have seen a lot of automations being done for the sake of automation. There will be budgets approved, only to realize that there is no ROI for a particular project. So COEs should basically create an intake mechanism whereby there is discovery of new opportunities, new projects. There is approval mechanism in terms of how do you approve it, what kind of ROI analysis are you going to do, what kind of cost benefit analysis are you going to do, who does it, who approves it, who governs it. So all of this, what we call as the intake process, is very, very important as part of the program. Now, once a program is budgeted and funded, and since most of us deal with technology here, in terms of the project, you also need to have the COE needs to spell out the governance aspect of it when it comes to SDLC. The methodologies are super important, right from project requirements all the way through to implementation, code review, the test case reviews, and documentation. So you might want to establish an enterprise-wide standard, and those processes will need to be adhered to. We'll show how a COE toolkit can be very helpful here in order to give a company-wide initiative there. And I talked about evangelization. I'm not going to repeat it. Again, you may want to have a process for, how often do people reach out? What kind of programs do you run? How do you encourage participants? Who gets, what are the various um, uh, motivations that you are doing within your company? So those become very, very important. Lastly, the technology. Fundamentally, COE, I've been telling, is all about collaboration. So you need to think about what are the tools that you're going to bring in where knowledge is disseminated, knowledge can be discovered, and you don't want to be relying on people. You want to basically take all the knowledge within the COE and bring it out, in the open here. So collaborative tools, discovery tools are becoming very, very important here. And even simple things like standardized templates can go a long way. For example, we have seen different teams estimating the same project in multiple different ways, and so you will get into non-standard way of estimating, non-standard way of budgeting, non-standard way of measuring your outcome, etc., etc. And so COEs should actually, when it comes to the frameworks and tooling, should look at some of these aspects of it. And we'll showcase some of this in a COE tool, but those are the key elements of standard COE. Now, from a role perspective, there are, I would say, the number one criteria for a standard hyperautomation COE is advisory or architecture consulting. And lately, we are seeing this is assuming a lot of importance, primarily because, a given project, like I said, there is a lot of confusion, or can I say, there's a lot of emphasis on which technology do I bring in order for us to automate it. So the consulting team should actually be very well equipped. It should be cross-functional. It should have domain expertise, as well as it should have cross-functional technology expertise, experts from RPA, experts from BPM, experts from AI, who can be housed as part of the hyperautomation team. And they should arbitrate. They should have a mechanism to say, how do we actually decide, which technology to take when a given project comes in. So there's a lot of advisory. There is a lot of effort goes into both internal advisory as well as working with the customer in terms of how do we go about implementing it. Then this next most important role is COEs should not be doing project management themselves. Rather, they should be setting up the templates and the framework and the methodologies for auditing the KRAs that has been outlined by the team. Whether it is managing the software development lifecycle, measuring the conformance of those standards and policies and procedures. Fundamentally, these there should be auditors and governors who are part of the COE organization. And I talked about you may also want to think about housing certain number of developers and for bringing those tools and building those toolkits and for some kind of an IT development which can actually make the life easy. You don't always want to rely on SharePoint or project management, the simple project management tools. A COE tool can go a long way, and building it in-house or using it from a standard third party can actually go a long way. Lastly, we have also seen COE teams playing a very strong role in terms of certain market facing. Many of the components and reusable entities that you're building can also be released in the third party marketplace. I saw a lot of people using Power Platform. Power Platform, for example, has a huge marketplace. Appin has a marketplace. In fact, many of these hyper automation vendors, they have their own marketplace. And so many ideas, many standards, many principles that your COE does can be taken to external entities and they can be marketed. So with that, I'll talk very quickly about a couple of examples of what we have done from a COE standpoint. This is one of the customers we had in Middle East. As you can see here, we started in 2017 with just one project, which was request for payment. How do we automate the payment, life cycle? We started with that particular project within one department, and over the course of last 6-7 years, this is just one technology. In this case, we are talking about Appian here, but you can very well see the success of a single project can have ramification across the enterprise. Multiple departments, will very soon take notice of it. And I'm sure you would have come across similar examples in your case. And what I want to outline is this would not have been possible without a successful COE embedded into the program. And again, without a standard development methodology, without a standard intake process, without a standard tooling, or looking at the KPIs and outcomes and metrics, we could not have had a proliferation. And this is with just one tool. Imagine what will happen when you combine multiple technologies together. And I don't have to repeat that. The emphasis is COEs will play a super important role in terms of bringing the best practices. The next one I want to talk about is an example from the travel industry. This is a case of where we saw the customer actually jumping into the citizens developer framework a little too early. So basically, what happened was, and this is not something we are seeing isolated with this customer, we are seeing this with quite a few other customers as well, where citizens developers are empowered a little too early in terms of the methodologies, in terms of the framework, in terms of a governance process like code review, checking in the right procedures, approvals. Without any of them, people, the teams do get empowered sometimes. And what happens as a result is that there is a little bit of a cowboy culture which comes into play. There is suddenly everybody starts developing it, and there's no standardization, there is no review, there is no methodology in place. Consequently, for this customer, for example, there was about 38% of failures in production. So every time there was an automation there, if there were 100 automation that went in, 38% would just stop working after a few days. That was the amount of failure rate that they had. And similarly, 74% of the projects were delayed, obviously because of lack of planning, lack of standardization and all that. And the moment we set up a COE and we brought in all the processes, you can see that from 74% delay, we went to zero delays. And similarly, from 38% automation, we went to 4% failure rate. This is the kind of statistics that you will see, especially when you're scaling your program or when you're embarking on bringing new class of developers like the citizens developers. Please think about having a HA COE in the mix, and please arbitrate around who is going to do what, and that is extremely important here. With that, I will have a very short demo, and Francisca, if I can ask for the second a poll question, that'll be great if you can do that. And I'll have Vikram share his screen while we do the demo. Thank you for sharing that. So with respect to hyperautomation low-code CoE, what are your plans for setting up? So this is basically, we are kind of curious to know if you already have a CoE, do you have any plans? Are you actively evaluating anything? For now, or you're not even looking at it. So we're kind of curious to know what the interests are, and we'll probably give another 10-15 seconds over here. Okay, with that, I think we can close the poll. Let's see if we have the response here. Oh, it's very interesting that we have 59% of them are saying that they don't have plans, and a good 31% of them are actually looking at actively evaluating CoE. Thank you for the data. We're very happy to consult and work with tell about our experiences there. Coming back, so I've been stressing upon the need for a CoE tool. And by the way, whether or not you have a third-party tool, even think of even your Excel as a starting point here. But what I would advocate is you definitely need to have certain constructs as part of the CoE toolkit. So what we are showing here is, especially when projects proliferate and you have a lot of projects happening in your in your enterprise. Vikram, sorry, if you can go back to the previous screen. There are a lot of standards that you want to bring in. For example, these are the various projects. And if you take one of the projects, yeah, Vikram, if you can go to that, click on one of them, say savings and loan application. You may want to bring a certain set of what we call as strategic items. These are, for example, do you conform to UI UX standards? Do you conform to release mechanisms? Do you have a checklist for code review? Are you complying by it? Now, a simple toolkit which can actually capture these in a manual way, we're not even talking about automation here, can go a long way because, especially when you have 100, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 projects, if you can show the dashboard here, this will give you a bird's eye view of what is your conformance with respect to the various projects. And you can decide what is important for your project. How much of code review is important, how much of UX design principles is important, code coverage for testing is important. So especially this kind of tooling is going to help you from a CoE standpoint. The next one I want to showcase is things like third-party libraries can actually come in your way. We have seen a lot of situations where you have number of projects, 20, 30, 40, 50 projects, and the number of libraries that you manage can come in the way of your release management. And so a simple CoE tool can actually go ahead in terms of how do you collect them, how do you version them, how do you take them to production, et cetera, et cetera. The last thing I want to talk about, and again, this is not a comprehensive list, is says things like licensing. As your team grows, as you add more and more users, how much of this is being used, utilized effectively? Are you running out of licenses? Are you using your capacity accurately? So fundamentally, there are various aspects of CoE. We have not shown you quite a bit in the interest of time, but right from capturing new automation opportunities all the way to managing your life cycle to looking at how you're managing your processes, a COE toolkit can come in very, very handy. And this is definitely required, as you scale your program. So with that, I know we are probably up against a clock here. We'll probably take some questions as we go along.
Yes, we have time for one question. The recording will be available afterward. So one of our audience members wants to know, as citizens develop more apps, how do we keep track of versions and reduce cybersecurity concerns with so many people in so many different remote locations outside of the typical company?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the common questions we are also hearing. In fact, what we would advocate is have through a gating process where before we give approval and give the access to the systems, it comes to the COE. COE actually takes cognizant of the approval, and the process should say who gets approved, what technology are they going to use, why are they using it, and who is approving it. And then, we can actually go ahead and the versioning actually comes in as a next level. But there are also tools where we can actually inquire. For example, if it is Power Platform, we can actually query the system and then get the versioning automatically. We can automate some of the processes, but at a fundamental level, we should have governance mechanism there.
That's terrific. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I want to thank Narendran and Vikram for giving us a wonderful presentation. I know we didn't get to all of your questions, but I'm sure someone will follow up with you and respond. And at this time, the two of you can go to the backstage so that we
Sure.
can call up our next session.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Francis.
much. Always a pleasure with both of you.